Hello and welcome back to another episode of the House of Trade, where we help you to navigate the dizzying array of complexity in financial markets. Today I want to talk about Russian influence in the BRICS and what it means for our trading. So the memory of the Soviet legacy in Africa and the desire to strengthen cooperation within the continent due to geopolitical conditions may not suffice for modern day Russia. African strategy and its day-to-day implementation must be efficient and competitive. So say the experts and scholars. But the Soviet Union's legacy in Africa is characterized by several key elements. Ideological influence is right up there. The Soviet Union played a significant role in promoting communism and left-wing ideologies along and across Africa during the Cold War. It provided support both ideologically and materially to various African liberation movements and left-leaning governments. It also helped with anti-colonial struggles. The Soviet Union supported African nations in their struggles against colonial rule. It provided military training, weapons, and diplomatic support to liberation movements in countries like Angola, Mozambique, and Ethiopia. Economic and infrastructure projects were also something that the Soviet Union initiated via various economic and infrastructure projects in African countries, which extended to and included building roads, schools, hospitals, industrial facilities, often in exchange for access to Africa's natural resources. Also, helping facilitate those anti-coups, those anti-overthrowing of governments, were arms sales in huge amounts. The Soviet Union was a major supplier of arms to African nations during the Cold War. This contributed to regional conflicts and power struggles all the way across the continent, and it also led to political alliances. The Soviet Union forged alliances with several African countries, including Egypt, Angola, Ethiopia, and more. These alliances often had significant geopolitical implications and shaped regional dynamics. It also extended to education and training. The Soviet Union didn't just stop at arms sales, but it also provided scholarships and education opportunities for many African students, fostering a generation of African leaders who were educated in the Soviet Union and who had some allegiance to modern-day Russia. Not to be forgotten are the post-Cold War challenges. With the end of the Cold War, many Soviet-backed regimes in Africa faced challenges. Some nations transitioned to new political systems and alignments, while others experienced prolonged conflicts and instability. But why am I talking about all of these things? Well, it's because the deep history of the Soviet Union in Africa kind of puts us where we are today with the relationship of Russia vis-a-vis Africa. Because modern day Russia boasts various business structures, university and civil organizations that have successfully engaged with Africa for a substantial duration, earning trust from many African people, African nations, and importantly, African governments. Nonetheless, these entities exhibit specialized interests in cooperating with Africa. This is also the case for other countries and regions I've mentioned before. Beyond these specialized niches, the situation does differ, however. Companies with over a decade-long presence in Africa remain active and relatively successful. However, they have not catalyzed a new wave of engagement. That's why we're seeing Russia positioning itself as a leader outside of the West, and previously prioritizing Western countries in daily economic, educational, civil, and cultural reactions, at least until 2022. Now, the situation has radically shifted as Russia no longer considers the West as priority due to changing geopolitical circumstances. It's vital now for Russia to intensively develop ties with non-Western regions and countries, including those in Africa. This necessitates swift action, potentially with risks and errors, but it also raises hopes that Africa will no longer be a residual area in Russia's priorities. But how can Russia benefit from this, and how can Africa also benefit from this? Well, Africa holds strategic importance for Russia for several reasons. Top of the list, resource wealth. Of course, we all know that Africa is rich in natural resources, including oil, gas, minerals, agricultural products. Access to these resources and these assets is vital for Russia's energy and economic interests. Russia is one of the world's leading energy producers, and African nations offer potential markets for Russian oil and gas exports. Developing energy partnerships with African countries can enhance Russia's energy security and, more importantly, their revenue at a time when dollar scarcity is real. They need to also establish geopolitical influence in the new spheres of influence and power. Establishing political and economic ties within African nations allows Russia to increase its global influence and counterbalance any Western dominance in international affairs. It provides Russia with more allies and voting support in international organizations like the United Nations. Africa is also a significant market for the arms industries, and Russia is a major exporter of arms. African countries often purchase Russian military hardware, furthering Russia's economic and strategic interests. There's also shared goals in counter-terrorism. Instability in parts of Africa, including the Sahel and the Horn of Africa, poses security threats to Russia and its allies. Collaborating with African nations on counter-terrorism helps protect Russian interests, and it also boosts its prestige at home and abroad. Engaging with African nations allows Russia to build diplomatic relationships and alliances, which can then be leveraged for political and economic support on the global stage. And let's be honest, when you are the persona non grata, you are the leper of society, you need as many friends as you can get. And the Soviet Union and Russia, modern and proper, seems to feel very abandoned in the wake of its invasion of Ukraine. So it's playing on his historical ties, because the Soviet Union had significant influence in Africa during the Cold War, and many African leaders received their education, like I said before, and even their military training in the Soviet Union. So Russia seeks to maintain and capitalize on those historical ties to give it things like market access. Because Africa's growing population represents a potential customer and consumer for Russian goods, where they've been banned and sanctioned and absolutely just abandoned before. Expanding ties economically with Africa can open new markets for Russian businesses that have suffered from their markets being completely closed off. Infrastructure projects can also help Russia to engage with African nations in a more beneficial way as well, such as building railways, power plants, and industrial facilities. These projects can enhance economic cooperation and provide Russia with investment opportunities. How about humanitarian and development assistance? Because by providing aid, development assistance, and educational opportunities, Russia can strengthen its soft power and improve its image in Africa, potentially leading to more favorable political relationships. Now, none of this is for free. None of this is altruistic or philanthropic. It's strategic, it's tactical, and it's well organized. It's structured to help Russia out primarily. African nations embracing Russia should be cautious of this, because Russia's heightened interest in Africa did not raise out of anywhere. It just didn't come out of the blue. This trend was evident in 2019, and it has intensified ever since. Numerous global summits and ministerial meetings involving Africa have occurred over the past years, such as US Africa, EU Africa, China Africa, Turkey Africa, Japan Africa. These gatherings proposed extensive economic and civil projects for African countries. While not all summit announcements materialize, they reflect heightened global competition for Africa. African countries have the opportunity to choose their partners, and they need to choose them very wisely, because if history tells us everything about African strategy and African resources, they are ripe for the plundering from less salubrious nations. And this remains true today. Though the level of global competition for Africa has risen significantly, moreover, Russia's geopolitical opponents are now obstructing its African cooperation to an even greater extent. And we've seen this before. Western nations inhibiting self-determination of African nations to do business with people and governments that they wish to do it with. Financial limitations may hinder Russia's international cooperation programs. Sanctions and redistribution of budget priorities due to military operations may restrict Russia's ability to lead in the race for Africa. However, available opportunities should be maximized. Vladimir Putin's focus on wooing African nations, as seen in his speech at the BRICS Global Summit in South Africa, reflects Russia's increased interest in Africa. Russia's trade with African states amounted to about £5.3 billion in 2019, and bilateral trade for the first half of 2023 increased by over 60%. It's a huge number. Russia seeks to capitalize on the power imbalances caused by the Black Sea grain deals collapse, for one example. Russia aims to also become a responsible food supplier to Africa, pledging to send free grain to 6 African countries and replace Ukrainian grain. However, concerns exist about the origins of some of Russia's grains exports, including potential grain taken from Ukraine during the invasion. Putin is increasingly isolated globally, and he needs cooperation from African states to maintain his facade as a global leader. He portrays the West's illegal sanctions regime as the cause of global food supply problems, despite Russia's own role in disrupting the Black Sea grain deal. But Putin's efforts to strengthen ties with Africa may face challenges within the BRICS bloc. Brazil's president has expressed reluctance to be seen as competition for the West. Despite reported technical difficulties during Putin's speech recently, he continues his charm offensive unperturbed in Africa. Shunned in the West and facing internal challenges, President Vladimir Putin seeks to protect normalcy and maintain support from his allies. Hosting African leaders in places like St. Petersburg is part of Russia's outreach to a continent that has become critical to its foreign policy. Now, while some African countries initially supported Russia following the Ukrainian invasion, the conflict is now straining these ties. This summit recently is expected to have fewer African leaders in attendance compared to 2019, with the Kremlin attributing this decline to brazen interference from the United States and its allies. To me, that sounds like Cold War rhetoric that's not truly justified. Tensions in the Black Sea, however, due to Russia's grain deal termination and recent aggressive actions, are causing a real global concern. African leaders may press Putin about the Wagner paramilitary group's fate as it attempted a mutiny against him. Russia is invigorating and reinvigorating its ties with Africa, albeit constrained by international sanctions and a shrinking economy. Russia has become a major arms supplier to sub-Saharan Africa, with Wagner mercenaries deployed in a variety of countries. African leaders remain divided in their response to Russian actions, reflecting a complex geopolitical and political dynamic. Putin aims to present himself as a champion against colonial legacy and advocates for greater African representation in global bodies. However, Africa's stance on Russia remains diverse, with many countries condemning its aggression in Ukraine. Overall, Putin's efforts to strengthen ties with Africa are influenced by complex geopolitical factors, including the ongoing Ukraine conflict and the balance of power on the global world stage. This is a complex and fast-moving environment, and what we see developing between Russia and African connections in the future is anyone's guess. All that we do know at the House of Trade is that this is going to be a fertile bed for geopolitical and macroeconomic repercussions around the world. How we trade it, how we navigate it is anyone's guess, but knowledge is key and knowledge is power. So let's stay tuned, share, follow, like and subscribe, and I'll catch you at the next time on the House of Trade. Ciao for now.